AITA for leaving after discovering my wife and her best friend secretly tested me? I'm Daniel, 42, and until this happened, I would have described my marriage as imperfect in a pretty ordinary way. My wife, Leah, is 40. We'd been together for 14 years and married for 11, which was long enough that most of our recurring arguments had stopped feeling dramatic and started feeling familiar. We knew each other's bad habits. We knew which subjects required a 10-minute buffer before one of us said something we'd regret. We knew that Leah wanted to talk through conflict immediately and that I usually needed time to figure out what I actually thought before I opened my mouth. That difference had caused real problems over the years. Early in our relationship, when I got overwhelmed, I had a habit of going quiet and leaving the room without explaining myself. I wasn't trying to punish her. I honestly thought I was preventing the argument from getting worse. But Leah experienced it completely differently. To her, I was disappearing while she was upset, leaving her alone with the problem. A few years into our relationship, after one especially ugly argument, she told me that when I walked away without saying anything, she felt abandoned. I remember wanting to defend myself. Instead, after we both cooled down, I admitted she had a point. I didn't become a different person overnight, but I learned to say, I need 20 minutes. I'm coming back. I'm not ending the conversation. Leah made a change too. She stopped following me from room to room, demanding that I answer immediately. We found a rhythm that wasn't perfect, but it worked better than what we had before. That compromise mattered to me because it made me believe we had learned how to interpret each other generously. The other person who had always been somewhere in the background of our marriage was Leah's best friend, Mallory. Mallory knew Leah before I did. They had been close for years, and I understood why Leah trusted her. Before Leah met me, she had dated a guy who was genuinely possessive. He questioned who she spent time with, complained when she saw friends without him, and gradually made her feel guilty for talking about their relationship to anyone else. Mallory was the person who helped Leah see how unhealthy it had become. Because I knew that history, I was always careful about how I talked about Mallory's involvement in our lives. I wasn't thrilled that Leah often called her after our arguments. I would be lying if I said I loved knowing some version of our fights was being discussed with someone who was always going to be loyal to my wife first. But I also had people I talked to occasionally. My younger sister, Audrey, knew when things were rough. A close friend might hear that Leah and I were having a bad week. I never believed marriage meant isolation. What I believed, and what I thought Leah believed, was that there was a difference between saying, "We had a terrible argument," and handing someone the most vulnerable parts of your spouse so they could take them apart. We had actually fought about that difference years before. At the time, I was frustrated because Leah had told Mallory details from an argument that I felt belonged between us. I said, too sharply, "Our marriage is not a committee." Leah heard that as me saying nobody else was allowed to have an opinion. I heard myself later and understood why. I apologized for how I said it. I told her I wasn't asking her to have no confidence. I was asking her not to turn every private disagreement into something Mallory got to vote on. We moved on. Or I thought we did. The night everything changed wasn't dramatic at first. Mallory was over for dinner. It was casual. Nothing special, just the three of us eating, talking about people we knew, and complaining about a show none of us liked enough to stop watching. At some point, Leah and I got into a mild disagreement about plans for the following weekend. It wasn't even really an argument. She thought we had agreed to one thing. I thought we had agreed to another. I could feel myself getting irritated in that familiar way where I knew if I kept talking, I was going to become overly precise and annoying. So I said, "I'm going to step outside for a couple of minutes. I'll come back and we can figure it out." Mallory laughed lightly and said, "Better than disappearing and turning into your dad, right?" I stopped with my hand on the back of the chair. There are comments that sound strange because they're inappropriate, and then there are comments that sound strange because they shouldn't exist at all. This was the second kind. A couple of years earlier, during one of the most difficult conversations Leah and I had ever had, I told her something I had never said to anyone else in quite those words. My father used silence as a weapon when I was growing up. If he was angry, he could go days barely acknowledging anyone. It made the whole house tense because you never knew what would bring him back or what would make it worse. During that private conversation with Leah, I admitted that one of my biggest fears was that my instinct to withdraw during conflict meant I was becoming like him. Leah had held my hand when I said it. She told me I wasn't him. I had never told Mallory that. Mallory seemed to realize almost immediately that something had gone wrong, because her smile faded. Leah looked down at her plate. I didn't ask anything right then. I didn't want to have that conversation with Mallory sitting there. I stepped outside anyway, mostly because I needed to get myself under control. I stood on the back porch for maybe 5 minutes and tried to come up with an innocent explanation. There wasn't one. When I came back inside, everyone acted normal in the strained way people do when they have all noticed the same thing and are pretending they haven't. Mallory left not long after. The second the door closed, I asked Leah, "What did you tell her?" Leah didn't pretend not to understand. She sighed and said, "Daniel, I was upset. I needed perspective. That isn't what I asked. I talked to her about our communication problems." "You told her what I said about my dad?" Leah rubbed her forehead. "I was trying to explain why the silence affects me the way it does. That was something I told you about me." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." She got defensive fast after that. "I need someone to talk to," she said. "You don't get to control who I talk to about our marriage." And the frustrating part was that I agreed with the sentence. I said, "You're right. I don't." She looked surprised. I continued, "But that doesn't mean everything I tell my wife becomes available for analysis by your friend." She was helping me understand what it meant. What meant? "The way you shut down. The way you pull away. I've talked to you about that for years. And I still have feelings about it. That isn't the point. It is part of the point." We went in circles for a while, not screaming. Somehow, that made it worse. Leah kept returning to her right to have support, and I kept trying to get her to acknowledge that there were some things I had told her because she was my wife, not because I was submitting them for outside review. Eventually, I asked, "Does Mallory know the exact things I say during arguments?" Leah looked at me and then away. That wasn't an answer, but it was enough to keep me awake that night. I didn't search her phone. I didn't try to get into her messages. I didn't follow Mallory online, start collecting screenshots, or do anything that would turn me into a detective inside my own marriage. What happened instead was that old incidents started looking different. It's strange how one piece of information can change the shape of memories you already have. A couple of months earlier, Leah had gone out after work with people she knew. Normally, if she was going to be much later than expected, she sent a short text. Not because I demanded it. I did the same thing. It was just our routine. That night, she didn't. By the time she was more than 2 hours later than what she had originally said, I called once. She answered, sounding fine, and told me she had decided to stay longer. I said, "Okay, I just wanted to make sure everything was all right." When she got home, she didn't seem particularly interested in the fact that I had been worried. She wanted to know exactly why I called. "How long were you waiting before you decided to check up on me?" she asked. I remember being confused by the wording. "I didn't check up on you. You were late, and I hadn't heard from you. You knew where I was." "I knew where you said you were going earlier." "How many times did you call?" "Once. You answered." She asked the question again later, almost like the number mattered more than the reason. At the time, I thought she was worried I was annoyed. Now I remembered it differently. Then there was a dinner we had planned as just the two of us. We'd both been busy, and Leah had specifically said she wanted a quiet night together. 20 minutes before we left, she told me Mallory was coming. I was annoyed. Not because Mallory was forbidden from dinner. Not because I thought Leah needed my permission. I was annoyed because we had made one plan and she changed it at the last second. I said, "I thought this was supposed to be us." Leah immediately asked, "Why does it bother you so much that she's coming?" I said, "Because that isn't what we planned. It's just dinner." "Then why couldn't you mention it earlier?" At the restaurant, I was polite. I didn't pick a fight. I also wasn't especially talkative. Mallory watched me more than usual. Leah did too. At one point, Mallory asked if I was having a bad time. I said, "I'm fine, just tired." Later that night, Leah accused me of being cold because I hadn't gotten over the change in plans fast enough. Another time, we had agreed to spend a Saturday doing a few things together. The morning of, Leah announced that she had made different plans for most of the afternoon. Again, the change itself wasn't catastrophic. What was strange was how quickly the conversation stopped being about the actual inconvenience. "Why do you need everything decided in advance?" she asked. "I don't. I just thought we already decided this." "Why is changing a plan such a big deal to you?" "It isn't a big deal. I'm telling you I'm irritated. Why does my doing something different bother you? The wording had felt off then. Now it felt familiar. Monitoring. Permission. Punitive silence. Controlling the narrative. Those phrases had started appearing in our arguments over the previous months. None of them was inherently suspicious. People pick up language from friends, podcasts, and social media. But Leah had never talked like that before. I thought about a different conversation from maybe 3 months earlier, during a calm week when nothing serious was happening. We were sitting on the couch and Leah asked me, "Do you ever worry that people don't see themselves clearly in relationships?" I said, "Sure. Everybody has blind spots." She asked, "Do you think you would know if you were being controlling?" I remember laughing a little because the question seemed abstract. I'd hope so, but I guess the person doing it is probably not always the best judge. She nodded like I had confirmed something. At the time, I forgot about it. The morning after Mallory's comment, I asked Leah if we could talk again. She looked tired before we even started. I said, "Were you trying to see how I would react?" She frowned. "To what?" "The night you came home late without texting. The dinner with Mallory. The weekend plans." "Why would you even ask me that?" "Because you weren't just upset in those situations. You were studying my reaction." "That is ridiculous." "Is it?" "Yes." I waited. Leah started cleaning a counter that was already clean. Then she said, "Mallory encouraged me to stop arranging everything around how you might react." That sentence landed harder than I expected. What does that mean? It means I shouldn't have to manage your feelings for you. That's not what I asked. You're doing that thing where you turn every word into a cross-examination. I'm asking whether Mallory told you to change normal situations and see what I did. It wasn't like some experiment. I remember staring at her because I had not used that word. I said, "I didn't say experiment." Leah went still. There was a long pause. Then she said, "She called them tests." I didn't. That was the first real admission. I sat down because standing there suddenly felt stupid. "What tests?" Leah crossed her arms, not dramatically, just like she was cold. She said I had gotten used to accommodating you so much that I might not know what your reactions would be if I stopped. Accommodating me how? Keeping you updated, giving you time to prepare for things, making sure changes don't upset you. I let out a single, humorless laugh. Keeping me updated when you're 2 hours late is accommodating me? You're making it sound worse than it was. I'm trying to understand what it was. Leah sat across from me. She told me Mallory had been worried for a while that Leah was normalizing things she would recognize as controlling if they happened to someone else. That part one understood, at least emotionally. Leah's previous relationship had changed her sense of what was normal. Mallory had been right about that man before Leah was ready to admit it. I could see how that history gave Mallory credibility in a way that would be hard for me to compete with. Leah said, "She told me that if the relationship was healthy, small acts of independence wouldn't become a problem." I said, "Not telling me you'll be hours late is not an act of independence. It's changing an established routine to see if I react." A secure person wouldn't need the update. A secure person can still wonder if his wife is okay. You called me. Once. You still called. I felt the trap before I fully understood it. I asked, what would I have had to do for that one to be fine? Leah said, "Nothing. It wasn't about passing or failing." Then why was it a test? She didn't answer. I got angrier than I had been the night before. I wasn't yelling. My anger usually goes in the opposite direction. I get quieter and overly controlled, which Leah hated because, as she put it, it felt like I was putting a pane of glass between us. I said, "Mallory is done being part of our marriage." Leah's face changed immediately. What does that mean? It means if we're going to stay married, I don't want her hearing anything about us anymore. So your answer is to tell me who I'm allowed to talk to? After this, yes. I don't trust her with any part of our marriage. There it is. What? This? This is exactly what she was talking about. I knew how it sounded. I knew it even as I said it. But in that moment, I did not care enough to soften it. I said, "If you honestly think me objecting to being secretly tested means the tests were justified, then I don't know what we're doing." Leah replied, "You're proving that the second I have outside support, you want to cut it off." That pushed me close to saying something cruel. Instead, I fell back on the routine we had spent years building. I need 30 minutes, I said. I'm leaving the room. I'll come back if we can talk without turning this into whether I'm allowed to object. Leah said, and now you're withdrawing. I looked at her for a second. That was the first moment I really understood that every move I made could be named something else. I went for a walk. The next person I spoke to was Audrey. She is 6 years younger than I am, and one of the only people in my family who can tell me I'm being an idiot without making me immediately want to argue. I expected her to be furious on my behalf. She was, but not in the uncomplicated way I wanted. I told her about Mallory's comment, Leah sharing the conversation about our father, and the tests. Audrey said, "That is seriously messed up." I felt relieved. Then she asked, "What did you say to Leah?" I repeated my demand that Mallory hear nothing else about our marriage. Audrey went quiet. I said, "What?" She said, "You can be betrayed and still say something controlling afterward. Those two things can exist at the same time." I got irritated. So I'm supposed to be fine with Mallory getting live updates? That is not what I said. Then what are you saying? I'm saying you don't get to turn your hurt into authority over Leah's friendships. I started to argue. Audrey cut me off. A boundary tells someone what you'll do. A rule tells them what they're allowed to do. Pick the one you actually mean. I hated how quickly I knew she was right. Not about everything. I still thought Leah and Mallory had crossed a line so far that I could barely see the original disagreement anymore. But I had responded by making a rule. No more Mallory. That was different from saying I would not stay in a marriage where my private disclosures were repeated to Mallory and where Leah staged situations to measure my reactions. I told Audrey that distinction sounded annoyingly neat compared to what it felt like in real life. She said, "Of course it does. Real life is usually messier. That doesn't make the distinction fake." Then she added something else I needed to hear. "You do shut down when you're upset. You know that, right?" "Yes. And it can be painful to be on the other side of that." "I know." That still doesn't make secret tests acceptable. That conversation didn't make me feel better. It made me feel clearer. When I went home, I told Leah I wanted to correct what I had said. She looked suspicious. I said, "I don't get to tell you who you can talk to. I was wrong to put it that way." She relaxed slightly. Then I said, "But I will not stay in a marriage where private things I tell you are passed to Mallory for interpretation, and I will not participate in situations you create to test my reactions. If that continues, I'm out." Leah said, "That sounds like the same thing with different wording." "It isn't. It ends with me not being able to talk to her." "No, it ends with me deciding what I will stay for." She didn't agree. But I did not take the correction back. The social fallout started before we had decided anything about the marriage. One mutual friend, Eric, became noticeably colder toward me. We had known each other for years. Not best friends, but friendly enough that the change was obvious. He stopped replying to a group thread the way he usually did when I said something. At a small get-together, he barely spoke to me. Eventually, another friend mentioned that Leah had told a few people I had found out she was talking to Mallory about our marriage and demanded that she stop. That version was technically related to what happened. It was also missing almost everything that made the situation what it was. For about an hour, I drafted a message in my head. I could explain the private disclosure. I could explain the tests. I could list the changed plans, the missing update, the dinner. I could tell everyone exactly why I was angry. Then I thought about what that would actually mean. I would be taking the most private conflict of our marriage and sharing it, just to defend myself from Leah doing the exact same thing. So I didn't. If someone asked directly, I said, there is more to it than a disagreement about Leah talking to a friend. I'm not going to spread the details around. That answer did not satisfy everyone. Some people probably thought it sounded evasive. I had to live with that. A few days later, Nate contacted me. Nate was a mutual friend who had known both of us for a long time. He was not dramatic, which is probably why I trusted what he said. He asked if we could talk privately. When we did, he said, "I don't know what's happening between you two, and I'm not trying to get in the middle. But there's one thing I think you should know." I waited. He said Leah had asked him several months earlier whether he thought I seemed controlling. I felt my stomach tighten. "What did she tell you?" "Not much. She gave me one argument. Something about you being upset because she changed a family plan after you two had already agreed on something else." "What did you say?" I told her I didn't know. I wasn't there. That sounded exactly like Nate. I asked, when was this? He thought about it and gave me a rough time frame. It was earlier than the incidents Leah had admitted were tests. I said, did she ask anything else? No, not really. She just seemed like she wanted me to tell her what it meant. Did Mallory come up? No. That was all Nate knew. He did not have proof. He did not have messages. He did not know about the tests. What he gave me was smaller and, in a way, worse. The question about whether I was controlling had existed before I knew I was being evaluated. For several days, Leah and I mostly avoided the larger conversation. We handled practical things. Groceries. Laundry. Whether one of us was using the car Saturday morning. It was surreal how ordinary a home can look while the relationship inside it is changing shape. I would hear Leah on the phone in another room and wonder if she was talking to Mallory. Then I would get angry at myself for wondering, because I did not want to become someone who monitored who his wife called. At night, we slept in the same bed, but farther apart than usual. Finally, I told Leah I wanted one conversation before we decided what came next. I said, I'm asking for one thing. I want this conversation to be ours. Not something Mallory helps you prepare for. Not something where I'm answering an argument she already made. Leah looked offended. I can think for myself. I hope so. I'm asking you to do that with me now. She agreed. We sat at the kitchen table because the couch felt too intimate and the bedroom felt impossible. At first, we went over the same ground. Leah said she had been scared that she was repeating an old pattern. I said I understood why that fear mattered. She said I focused so much on my intentions that I sometimes ignored the effect of my behavior. I admitted that was fair. There had been times when I had said I needed space, and then taken longer than I promised to come back. There had been times when my quietness after an argument probably felt less like self-control and more like distance. I had spent years telling myself that because I wasn't yelling, I was handling conflict well. That was not always true. Leah said, "You keep acting like this came out of nowhere." I said, "I'm not saying the problems came out of nowhere. I'm saying the tests did." She started to explain one of them again. I stopped her. I don't want to argue about whether calling once was controlling. I don't want to argue about dinner. I don't want to argue about the weekend plan. Because you don't want to look at your reactions. No, because I finally understand that defending each reaction is not getting us anywhere. Leah leaned back. I asked, "When did you first start thinking you might need to leave me?" She looked at me like I had changed subjects completely. What? When did you first think maybe you should leave the marriage? I don't know why that matters right now. It matters to me. This is about how I felt in the relationship. I know. When did you first think about leaving? Leah looked toward the window. The pause was long enough that I had the answer before she spoke. Finally, she said, "Months ago." How many? I don't know. 4, maybe 5. Did you tell Mallory? Yes. Was that before the first test? Another pause. Yes. That changed everything. Not because thinking about leaving was unforgivable. People in long marriages think things they are afraid to say. People get unhappy. People imagine other lives. I might have been devastated if Leah had told me 5 months earlier that she was considering leaving, but at least we would have been standing in the same reality. Instead, I had spent those months believing we were having ordinary marriage problems while Leah had privately turned them into an evaluation period. I asked, "So what were the tests supposed to tell you?" She said, "I needed to know if I was just unhappy or if something unhealthy was happening." Why didn't you ask me to go to counseling with you? I didn't even know what I thought yet. You thought about leaving me. That isn't the same as deciding to leave. I know, but it means you were not neutral when this started. I never said I was neutral. You told me these tests were about seeing what happened naturally. They were. No, you were already looking for an answer. Leah shook her head. I was looking for clarity. That word bothered me because it made the process sound cleaner than it was. I asked, what response would have counted as proof that I was not controlling? She said, it wasn't that simple. Give me one. Daniel. One response. The night you didn't text. If I called, that could be monitoring. If I was angry when you got home, that could be control. If I didn't say anything but I was quiet, that could be punishment. What was the good answer? You're reducing everything. I'm asking what success looked like. She didn't answer. I continued, once, because I did not want to spend the rest of my life litigating each incident. The dinner. If I objected, I was controlling who you saw. If I stayed but I was quiet, I was punishing you with my mood. The weekend plans. If I asked why you changed them, I needed control of the schedule. If I walked away because I was irritated, I was withholding. What exactly could I have done that Mallory would have looked at and said, "That's fine. Daniel is fine"? Leah said, "Mallory was trying to protect me." Protection is not neutral when the answer is decided in advance. She did not decide the answer. Then why can't you tell me what would have changed her mind? Leah's eyes filled with tears, but she was angry too. You're making this all about betrayal because you don't want to ask why I was scared enough to need any of this. That was the hardest part of the conversation because there was truth inside what she said. I had focused almost entirely on what she did. I had not spent much time asking why she had become so uncertain about me. So I tried. I said, "Okay, you were scared." She looked at me. "I believe you," I said. "I believe my shutting down has hurt you. I believe there were times I treated needing space like that automatically made my behavior healthy. I believe I can be too cold when I'm trying not to escalate. I should have taken that more seriously." Leah was quiet. Then I said, "But none of that makes deceiving me acceptable." Her face closed again. I knew there would be a but. There has to be. Understanding why you did it is not the same as saying it was okay. You make everything sound so clinical. I'm trying not to say something I can't take back. And that is exactly what I mean. You pull away and turn into this completely detached person. I'm sitting here. Physically. I took a breath. Then Leah said the sentence that, in hindsight, ended the marriage for me. "Mallory said you'd turn this into a betrayal story so you wouldn't have to look at yourself." I stared at her. Then I asked, "Does Mallory already know what you plan to say in this conversation?" Leah did not answer immediately. That hesitation told me enough. Even after everything, Mallory was still in the room in the only way that mattered. I said, "I asked for one conversation between us. I'm allowed to prepare myself." "I didn't say you weren't." "You act like the fact that I talked to someone means my thoughts aren't mine." "No, I'm saying I cannot tell where your judgment ends and hers starts anymore." "That's insulting." "Then help me understand." "I am trying." "No, you are still telling me what Mallory predicted I would do, then treating my reaction as proof that she understands me better than I do." Leah said, "You are making her the villain because it is easier than hearing me." I shook my head. "I'm not asking you to choose between me and a friend. I'm asking whether there are two people making decisions in this marriage or three." Leah looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "If you leave over this, you are going to prove her right." That was the moment something in me stopped trying to win. I said, "Then I'm done living my life as evidence in somebody else's argument." Leah's face changed. I told her I wanted a separation. Not because I had planned it before that conversation. I hadn't. Not because I suddenly felt certain the marriage had always been terrible. I didn't. I wanted a separation because I no longer knew how to exist honestly inside the system we had created. If I was angry, the anger meant something. If I was calm, the calm meant something else. If I wanted privacy, privacy became isolation. If I asked questions, questions became monitoring. If I stopped arguing, silence became punishment. And the person deciding what it all meant was not even in the marriage. Leah cried. I did too, eventually, though not during the first part of the conversation. She said I was making a permanent decision in response to fear. I said I was making a temporary decision because I did not trust us to keep talking while the rules were changing underneath me. For the first few days, separation mostly meant practical discomfort. I stayed with Audrey for a short time, then arranged somewhere else to stay. I am deliberately leaving out those details because they are not important to the story, and because by that point, I had learned that not every part of a breakup needs an audience. What mattered was how strange, ordinary life became. I would see something Leah would normally find funny and reach for my phone before remembering we were not talking that way. I would wake up at 2 in the morning and instinctively listen for her moving around the house, even though she wasn't there. I had spent 14 years building reflexes around another person. They did not disappear because I had made a decision at a kitchen table. Leah sent me long messages for the first couple of weeks. Some were angry. Some were apologetic in a partial way. Some were arguments that seemed designed to continue conversations we had already had. One message said, "I wish you cared as much about why I was unhappy as you care about proving the tests were unfair." I stared at that one for a long time. I almost responded point by point. Instead, I wrote, "I do care why you were unhappy. I'm willing to talk about that when we are both calmer. I'm not willing to keep debating whether I'm allowed to be hurt by what happened." After that, I limited most of our communication to practical matters. The separation did not make me feel vindicated. It made me doubt myself constantly. Some mutual friends clearly believed I had overreacted. Eric remained distant. Another friend told me, carefully, that Leah was afraid I had been emotionally controlling for years and that maybe I should take that seriously instead of focusing on Mallory. I said I was taking it seriously. He asked if that meant I would go back. I said, "Those are not the same question." A couple of people thought the tests were outrageous. A few did not want to get involved. Most people probably had incomplete information because I had decided not to make my defense their problem. That choice cost me. There were days when I wanted to send screenshots of my own conversations with Leah, not because they contained some smoking gun, but because I wanted people to see the context she had left out. I never did. Audrey stayed annoyingly consistent through all of it. When I started rewriting the marriage in my head, so Leah was wrong in every memory, she stopped me. "She did not invent every problem," she said. "I know." "Do you?" "Yes." "And when you start telling yourself you were always patient and emotionally available, remember, I have met you." That actually made me laugh. Then she got serious. "You are allowed to leave because trust is gone. You do not need to turn her into a monster to justify it." That became important later. Several weeks into the separation, Leah asked if we could meet. Her message was different from the others. Shorter. "Can we talk? Not about getting back together. Something happened with Mallory." I almost said no. Then I agreed. When we met, Leah looked exhausted. She did not start with a defense. She said, "Mallory told Jenna details about the separation." Jenna was another friend in their circle. I knew her, but not well. I asked, "What details?" Leah gave me a couple of examples. They were not my secrets this time. They were hers. Things she had said to Mallory about how scared she was, what she regretted, and what she had asked me during one of our conversations. Leah had specifically told Mallory not to repeat them. "How did you find out?" I asked. Jenna mentioned something she could only know from Mallory. "What did Mallory say when you asked?" Leah laughed once, bitterly. She said she needed support too. I did not say anything. Leah looked at me. She said carrying all of this for me had been hard, and she needed someone to talk to. I still did not say anything. Leah said, "You can say it." "I'm not going to." "You were right." "That is not what I was going to say." "What were you going to say?" "That needing support doesn't erase someone else's right to privacy." Leah looked down at her hands. Then she said, "It sounds different when you're the person being discussed." "Yes. I know that sounds hypocritical. It sounds human." That was the first conversation after the separation where I felt like we were actually talking to each other instead of to positions. Leah told me she had confronted Mallory. Mallory had not apologized at first. She had defended herself by saying she had been supporting Leah for months and needed somewhere to put her own emotions about it. Leah said, "That was basically my argument to you." I nodded. She said Mallory also told her that Jenna was trustworthy and that nothing bad would come from her knowing. I asked, "Did that make it feel better?" "No." We sat quietly for a while. I did not enjoy the irony. I had imagined, during some of my angrier moments, that I would feel satisfied if Leah ever experienced the same kind of violation. I didn't. It mostly made me sad that understanding had required another breach of trust. Leah and Mallory did not have some explosive friendship breakup. There was no dramatic confrontation where Leah suddenly announced I had been right all along. They pulled back from each other. Leah stopped telling Mallory as much. Mallory, from what little I heard, still believed she had been trying to protect Leah. She also believed I had used the privacy issue to avoid facing legitimate criticism. Maybe she still believes that now. I stopped caring in the way I had before. A couple of weeks after the conversation about Jenna, Leah asked to meet again. This time she apologized. Not the kind of apology where every sentence has an explanation attached to it. Not, "I'm sorry, but I was scared." Not, "I'm sorry Mallory pushed me." She said, I shared things you told me because I wanted someone else to tell me what they meant. That was wrong. I listened. She continued. Mallory influenced me, but she did not make me do the tests. I agreed to them. I said, okay. Leah's eyes filled again. I kept asking her what everything meant because I was scared to decide what I meant. That was mine, not hers. That sentence mattered to me more than all the previous ones. She told me that admitting she was unhappy had felt dangerous in its own way. If she said she wanted to leave a decent marriage because she was unhappy, then she would have to own the decision. There would be no villain, no clear reason other people would automatically accept. But if I was controlling, if there was a pattern she had failed to see, then leaving would feel necessary rather than chosen. She said, I think I wanted a reason that would make the decision for me. I asked, did you want to leave? She took her time before answering. I didn't know. That is still an answer. I know. Then she said one of the saddest things I heard through the whole separation. I kept asking other people whether I should trust my own marriage until there wasn't much trust left. I did not disagree. Leah asked if her apology changed anything. I said it changed how I understood her. She asked, does it change what you want? I told her the truth. I don't know yet. For a while, that was where we left it. We stayed separated for months. During that time, I had to confront a few things about myself without using them as reasons to erase what Leah had done. I started being more deliberate about how I handled conflict, even with people who were not Leah. If Audrey and I disagreed and I needed space, I said exactly how long I needed instead of assuming she knew. If I was upset with a friend, I tried not to disappear into silence because I had finally accepted that intent does not fully control impact. I also noticed something else. Whenever I imagined getting back together with Leah, I thought about what I would tell her and what I would keep to myself. Not practical information. Vulnerable things. If I had a fear about my family, would I tell her? If I felt ashamed of something, would I risk saying it out loud? If we had an argument, would I speak naturally, or would I hear an invisible jury in my head deciding what every sentence meant? The answer kept being the same. I would edit myself. That was what finally made the decision clear. I loved Leah. I was not even sure I had stopped being in love with her. But I did not want to rebuild a marriage where I entered every difficult conversation wondering who else would eventually hear the most vulnerable parts. And I did not want Leah to live in a marriage where she was constantly trying to determine whether my ordinary reactions were signs of something dangerous. We met one evening after several months apart. I told her I did not want to reconcile. She cried quietly. I did too. There was no huge fight. She asked if I was sure. I said, as sure as I can be about something I wish were different. She said she had hoped we could rebuild slowly. I told her I had hoped that too, at first. Then I explained what I had noticed about myself. I keep imagining coming back and editing everything I tell you. I don't want that life. And I don't think you should want it either. Leah looked hurt, but she did not argue. She said, so the apology wasn't enough. It was real. That matters. But it doesn't fix it. No. She nodded. We talked for a while about what ending the marriage respectfully would look like. I am not going into procedural details because there was no dramatic legal battle, and nothing about paperwork changes the reason we ended. The strange thing was that once we stopped trying to save the marriage, some of our conversations became kinder. There was grief in them, but less strategy, less proving, less asking what each reaction meant. During one of our final long conversations, we ended up talking about the first years of our marriage and the arguments we used to have about Mallory. Leah gave a tired smile and said, you once told me our marriage wasn't a committee. I hated that sentence. I said, I remember. I still hate how you said it. Fair. She looked down for a second, then back at me. But I made it one. I did not tell her I had been right. I hadn't been, not exactly. When I first said that sentence years earlier, part of me really had wanted the discomfort of outside opinions to go away. I had said something with a legitimate point in a controlling-sounding way, and Leah had been right to push back on that. But by the end, we both understood the distinction we had missed. A marriage does not have to be sealed off from friends to be private. A spouse can need support without turning the other spouse into a case to be studied. A friend can care deeply without becoming the person who sets the tests, interprets the results, and helps decide what the marriage means. And I can admit that my behavior hurt Leah without agreeing to live inside a system where every response is evidence for a conclusion someone else already reached. The marriage ended. I lost the future I assumed I was going to have. I lost some friendships, or at least the easy version of them. Leah lost trust in Mallory, though not necessarily the entire friendship. I learned that Audrey could disagree with me in the middle of a crisis without betraying me, which made me trust her more, not less. Leah had to live with the fact that her fear of making the wrong choice helped create the conditions that ended the marriage. I had to live with the fact that leaving did not prove I was right about everything. That part mattered more than I expected. For months, I had treated being understood like a goal I could reach if I just explained myself clearly enough. I thought if I found the perfect wording, Leah would see my intention. Mallory would see the context. Our friends would see the whole picture. Eventually, I stopped doing that. I corrected factual things when I needed to. I admitted what I had done badly. I apologized for trying to turn my boundary into a rule. I stopped trying to pass a test I never agreed to take. Leah's apology mattered to me because it was the first time she fully owned what she had chosen without making Mallory either the villain or the authority. I forgave more than I expected to. I still ended the marriage. Those two things turned out not to cancel each other out. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.